She didn't mean to call him. That's the thing nobody talks about afterward. How the worst nights of your life turn on something as stupid as a trembling finger hitting the wrong name. Ivy Calloway was crouched behind a locked bathroom door with blood on her lip and her husband's voice tearing through the walls like a blade looking for a seam. And she was trying to reach her sister. Just her sister. Just Nora, who lived 40 minutes away and would come without asking questions. Instead, she called a man who would change everything. And the city of Seattle, gray and soaked and indifferent, kept on raining. If you're watching this, stay until the end. Because what happened to Ivy Calloway is the kind of story that starts with a wrong number and ends with an empire in flames. Hit like. Drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The bathroom was small. That was the first thing that always struck her. How small it was for a house that cost $2.4 million. Marble floors, a soaking tub that had never once been used for soaking, recessed lighting that hummed at exactly the frequency of a migraine. Marcus had approved every fixture himself, guided her hand on the catalog pages the same way he guided everything, with a pressure that felt like suggestion and functioned like a command. Ivy sat with her back pressed against the cabinet beneath the double vanity. Her knees were pulled to her chest. Her phone was in both hands, screen brightness turned all the way down, the glow barely enough to see the contact name she needed. Nora. She could hear him on the other side of the house, not shouting anymore, but that was somehow worse. The shouting she could track. The silence that came after meant he was methodical now, deliberate. It meant he'd found the place in himself that went cold and professional. And that version of Marcus Wren was far more dangerous than the one who threw things. She'd learned that in 3 years of marriage. She'd had to. Her thumb moved. The screen blurred. She blinked hard, realized her left eye was already swelling. Just the outer corner. Not enough to close. Enough to make everything slightly wrong. And she found the name, pressed it, held the phone close to her mouth. It rang twice. A soft chime on her end indicated a voicemail greeting, but she was already speaking before she processed it, words tumbling out in a whisper that couldn't afford to be anything more than a whisper. Nora, please. I need you to come. I'm in the bathroom. I locked it, but he knows this house better than I do. He designed it. He knows where everything... Please, don't let him find me. Call the police or just come. A sound from the hallway. Close. Too close. She ended the call. She sat very still, the phone pressed flat against her sternum like she could muffle the sound of her own heartbeat, and she watched the strip of light beneath the bathroom door and waited to see if his shadow would appear in it. It didn't. Not yet. 3 seconds. 5. She let out a breath so slow it barely moved the air. Then her phone vibrated. She almost dropped it. She looked at the screen expecting Nora's name, expecting a call back, and instead saw a number she didn't recognize. Not stored, not labeled, Seattle area code, but not anyone she'd ever programmed. She hadn't called Nora. The realization landed like stepping onto a stair that isn't there. Her stomach dropped. Her thumbs scrolled back through recent calls, and she saw it. The number she'd dialed was off by 1 digit. 1 digit. 6 instead of 7, transposed in the dark by a hand that was shaking too hard to aim straight. The incoming call was from that same wrong number. She almost let it go to voicemail. Every rational survival instinct said, let it go. A stranger, in the middle of the night, after receiving a panicked message from a number they didn't know. It was the kind of call you declined and blocked, and forgot about. She answered. Silence on the other end. Not the silence of a deadline. She could hear ambient sound, the low hum of climate control, maybe the distant suggestion of rain. Someone was there and deliberately not speaking first. She pressed the phone tighter against her ear. I'm sorry, she breathed. I dialed the wrong number. Please just forget whatever you heard. A pause. Then a voice. Male, low, unhurried in the specific way that men with power learn to speak, because they've never once had to raise their voices to be taken seriously. You said don't let him find you. She couldn't answer that. Where are you? He asked. I can't tell you that. I don't know who you are. You don't, he agreed. There was no argument in it, no attempt to reassure her, just a flat acknowledgement that sat between them like a stone. "Send me your address." "That is genuinely insane," she whispered. "Maybe." Another pause. She could feel him thinking, not scrambling, not improvising, thinking the way someone thinks when they've already mapped out the territory and they're simply choosing which route to recommend. "But you called, so either you hang up and figure this out alone, or you tell me where you are." From somewhere down the hall, she heard a handle turning. Not the bathroom door. The guest bedroom, 2 rooms away. He was searching in sequence. Her hand had already started typing before she'd finished deciding. She sent the address in a text, stared at what she'd done, felt something that might have been relief or might have been the worst mistake of her life, and had no way of knowing which. "Got it," the voice said. Then, "Don't open the door for anyone but my people. When they knock, they'll say the word architect." "Why architect?" He didn't explain. The line went dead. Ivy sat in the marble bathroom with the swelling eye and the silence and the distant sounds of a man who had broken 4 of her ribs in 3 years, 2 at a time, efficiently, in places that didn't show. And she waited to find out what kind of mistake she'd just made. He wrote Sec. His name was Dante Castellano, though most people in Seattle knew him only by proximity. His name appeared on donation plaques outside a children's hospital, and in the small print of 3 legitimate development companies, and nowhere else. He had a talent for that, for being present without being visible, influential without being documented. He was 41. He'd built his empire on strategic patience and the willingness to make decisions that other men couldn't make without flinching. He employed lawyers the way other people employed security guards, and he employed security guards the way other people employed furniture, constantly, expensively, and without much thought about their presence until something went wrong. He was sitting in the back seat of an armored SUV when the voicemail came in, already crossing the bridge back from a meeting that had gone 40 minutes longer than he'd allocated for it. He had a glass of water and a folder he'd been ignoring and his phone, which he checked every 12 minutes out of habit rather than anxiety. An unknown number. A voicemail. He almost deleted it without listening. He didn't. Afterward, he played it again. Not because he hadn't heard it the first time. He absorbed things the first time, always had. But because there was something in the voice itself that made him want to confirm what he thought he'd detected. She wasn't performing. That was it. Fear that's performed has a shape, an arc, a climax, a point it's building toward. This woman was just afraid. Cleanly, completely. The way a person is afraid when there's no audience and no strategy, and they've simply run out of options. He called back. He didn't analyze why. He wasn't a man who spent much time on self-examination. He called back because the voice had lodged somewhere in him. And he was curious. And curiosity was one of the only impulses he still trusted completely. When she answered, when he heard the same breathless containment, he asked where she was. He hadn't expected her to actually send it. Most people in that situation would have hung up. She sent the address 20 seconds after he asked, which meant either she was reckless or she was desperate enough that the distinction between reckless and necessary had collapsed. He looked out the rain-streaked window. He had 3 operational teams on call on any given night. He redirected 1. Then he opened the folder he'd been ignoring and turned his full attention back to work, which was what he did with uncertainty. He put it in a compartment and worked around it until the situation clarified. The situation would clarify in about 14 minutes. The knock came 11 minutes later. 3 beats. A pause. Then 1 more. She had her hand on the bathroom doorknob and couldn't make herself turn it. 14 seconds went by in which the only thing that moved was the condensation dripping down the cold marble wall. "Architect," said a voice on the other side. Female. Flat. Ivy opened the door. The woman standing in her bathroom doorway was compact, maybe 5'4", built like someone who'd spent years making themselves smaller in some contexts and larger in others. Dark hair pulled straight back. An earpiece. A jacket that Ivy, whose entire professional life was pattern recognition, immediately clocked as slightly too structured in the left shoulder to be purely aesthetic. "We have maybe 3 minutes," the woman said. Is there anyone else in the house we need to worry about? Just him. Where? West Wing, last I heard. The woman touched her ear, murmured something, nodded at whatever response she got. Okay, you're going to walk directly behind me, stay inside arm's reach, and not speak until we're outside. You understand? Yes. You have a phone? Ivy held it up. Keep it. Let's go. They went through the kitchen. Ivy didn't let herself look at anything. Not the island where she'd spent 3 years preparing meals timed to the minute. Not the pantry door she'd once locked herself inside for 6 hours while Marcus drove in circles and called her phone 87 times. She kept her eyes on the back of the woman's jacket, and she kept walking. Cold air, rain, a vehicle with tinted windows and its engine already running. The door closed behind her, and the house, the $2.4 million house, with the marble bathroom and the fixtures Marcus had approved, disappeared behind a curtain of rain, and Ivy sat in the back seat of a stranger's car and shook so hard she had to press her hands flat against her thighs to feel them. The woman in the front passenger seat didn't look back. We're taking you somewhere safe. Where? Safe. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I'm authorized to give. Ivy looked out the window. Seattle scrolled past. Wet streets, yellow headlights blurred in puddles. A city carrying on its ordinary midnight business, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just left the only life she'd known for 3 years based on 4 words from a stranger's phone. Send me your address. She pressed her thumb against her lower lip, felt the split there, the dried blood, and thought, what did I just do? The safe house was a 5th-floor apartment in Capitol Hill, tastefully unremarkable, with the specific quality of a space that had been deliberately stripped of personality. Functional furniture, blackout curtains, a kitchen stocked with things that could be prepared quickly. It had the same feeling as an airport hotel, a place designed for transition, not habitation. Ivy sat at the kitchen table with an ice pack against her eye and a glass of water she hadn't touched, and the woman from the car, who had introduced herself as Reyes, just Reyes, sitting across from her with a tablet and the particular patience of someone paid to wait. He's going to know I'm gone, Ivy said. We're aware. He has contacts in the police department, at least 2, maybe more. I've overheard things. Reyes made a note without looking particularly surprised. What kind of contacts? I don't know specifics, but whenever he was worried about a meeting or a transaction, he'd make a call and then he'd stop being worried. That's all I know. Okay. Reyes set the tablet flat on the table. Here's what's going to happen tonight. You're going to stay here. There are 2 people outside the door and 1 on the street. In the morning, someone is going to come talk to you. You can ask them questions. Who's coming? A pause. Brief, but measurable. Castellano. The name landed in the room like a piece of furniture being moved. It had a weight to it. The kind of weight that came not from being shouted, but from being spoken very quietly by many different people over many different years. Ivy didn't know the name. She would realize later how remarkable that was. That she had lived in Seattle for 3 years, moved through its wealthiest social spaces, attended its charity galas and its private club dinners and its wine country weekends, and she had somehow never intersected with Dante Castellano's orbit. She would realize that wasn't coincidence. He'd simply never allowed himself to exist in spaces she could document. Is he safe? She asked. Reyes's expression didn't change. He sent us here. That doesn't answer my question. No, Reyes said carefully. It doesn't. She stood, collected the tablet. There's a first aid kit in the bathroom. Get some sleep if you can. She left Ivy alone with the untouched water and the ice pack and the whole shattering weight of a night that had started with rain and a locked door and a trembling thumb, and was now something she didn't have a name for yet. She got up, found the first aid kit, stood in the bathroom of the safe house. So different from the marble bathroom, just white tile and a mirror with no decoration, and looked at her face. The eye was worse than she'd thought. The lip was manageable. There was a bruise along her jaw she hadn't noticed yet, yellowing at the edges in a way that suggested it was older than tonight, which was true. She cleaned what she could, changed into clothes Reyes had left folded on the bed, plain, dark, not her size, but close. Lay down on top of the covers because getting underneath them felt like too much of a commitment to the night being over. Her phone said 2:14 a.m. She didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling and ran through every conversation she'd accidentally overheard in 3 years of marriage. Every phone call Marcus had taken in the next room, every visitor who had arrived unannounced and left without being introduced, every renovation project where the clients had paid in structures too complicated to explain as anything but deliberate. And she felt the shape of something enormous that she'd been too close to see clearly. She thought about the building on Harbor View Drive, the one she'd designed the interiors for 18 months ago, the most expensive commission of her career, the one Marcus had steered her toward with that same gentle but absolute pressure. She remembered how the clients had insisted on specific modifications: a basement-level room with no windows and a ventilation system 4 times larger than any space that size required, corridor dimensions that didn't match the exterior plans, a loading entrance framed by a wall of what appeared to be decorative concrete but which she now recognized as sound-dampening aggregate. She had been inside those buildings. She had touched those walls. She closed her eyes, and the buildings were still there. He arrived at 7 in the morning. Ivy heard the door, 3 knocks, the same sequence as the night before, which told her the protocol was standard. And she was already up, already sitting at the kitchen table with the water glass replaced by coffee she'd made at 6. Dante Castellano was not what she expected, which she realized immediately was itself a kind of expectation she should never have formed. She'd spent the hours between 2 a.m. and dawn constructing him from the evidence she had, the voice, the directness, the organized quiet of his operation. And she'd built someone larger, more broadly obvious in his power. He was tall, but not excessively so. Dark eyes, dark hair going gray at the temple in a way that was entirely natural, nothing managed about it. A suit that cost a significant amount of money, but hadn't been chosen to announce that. The thing about him that she registered last, because it was the thing she'd been least prepared for, was that he looked tired. Not exhausted. He was too controlled for it to reach his posture. But around the eyes was the quality of someone who hadn't slept deeply in some time, and who'd accepted that as a permanent condition. He sat down across from her without being invited, set his phone face down on the table, looked at her eye. "You want a doctor?" "I want answers," she said. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. More like the ghost of one. Involuntary, gone before it could be confirmed. "Fair." He turned the phone over, pulled something up, set it so she could see. A series of documents. Financial records, she thought initially, but structured in ways that felt architectural to her instinct. Shell companies nested inside, holding companies nested inside consulting entities. Money flowing through pipes that didn't appear connected from any surface angle. "Your husband's name appears in the outer layer of this. Do you know what it is?" She looked at it. "It looks like a real estate portfolio." "It's a laundromat," he said it matter-of-factly. "Not the kind with coin machines. About $2 billion moves through this structure every 18 months. Your husband manages the integration layer, the point where offshore capital gets converted into domestic property assets." She was quiet. "How long?" she asked finally. "Our preliminary estimate is 7 years, but likely longer." 7 years. 2 years before she'd met him. She'd done the math before she could stop herself, the same way she always calculated load-bearing requirements and square footage, automatically, reflexively. "Who does the money belong to?" "We don't know yet," he said. "And that's the problem. The organization behind this is structured so that the money itself is untraceable to any individual actor, which means it's large enough to have invested heavily in making it untraceable." He pulled the phone back. "What we do know is that 3 accountants who've had access to the internal ledgers in the past 4 years have disappeared. Not died publicly. Disappeared." The coffee she'd been holding suddenly felt cold in her hands. "You're telling me this to scare me," she said. "I'm telling you this so you understand what you're in the middle of," he said. There was no apology in it. She'd expected softening, some version of "I know this is difficult," and there wasn't any, and she found she was more grateful for the absence of it than she would have been for its presence. You can choose to walk away. We can set you up somewhere under a different name, something clean, and you never have to think about Marcus Wren again. But, she said. He looked at her steadily. But you've been inside those buildings. She felt the full weight of what she knew arrange itself inside her like a set of floor plans. Every room, every wall, every modification that had seemed odd at the time, and which she'd filed away and not examined because married life had taught her not to examine things too carefully. There's a building on Harbor View Drive, she said slowly. I designed the interior renovation. I have original plans and change orders and photographic records of the construction process. He didn't move. But something in the air around him changed, a sharpening, an intensification that was almost visible. Tell me about the building on Harbor View Drive, he said. She did. She talked for 40 minutes without stopping. She described dimensions and materials and access points and the modifications that didn't make spatial or aesthetic sense until you understood what they were actually designed to conceal. She described 3 other properties, 2 private residences and a waterfront event space, where she'd noticed similar anomalies and had assumed she'd misunderstood the client's specifications. She hadn't misunderstood. She'd simply never been allowed to understand. Dante listened. He did not take notes. He did not interrupt. He asked 2 questions in 40 minutes, both of them precise and structural, and when she answered, he absorbed the answers and went still in a way that reminded her of a house settling after a storm, everything realigning, weight redistributing. When she finished, neither of them spoke for a moment. You have documentation of all of this? He asked. It's on a cloud drive, my professional archive. Marcus doesn't know it exists. I maintained it through an account he doesn't have access to. He knew I documented my projects, but he assumed it was a local drive on a computer he controls. She paused. He controls a lot of things. He didn't know that one. Okay? He stood, picked up his phone, looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully decode. Not quite appraisal, not quite respect. Something somewhere between them that she hadn't been on the receiving end of in long enough that she almost didn't recognize it. We need to move you again today. Different location. Why? Because Marcus Wren will have already identified that you were extracted professionally, which means he'll assume you have protection, which means he'll stop looking for you as a missing wife and start looking for you as a potential liability. He moved toward the door. You understand the difference. She understood the difference. Castellano, she said. He stopped. Why are you doing this? She asked. Not aggressively. She genuinely needed to know the shape of the thing she'd stepped into, needed to understand what she was exchanging one set of walls for. He turned back. The tiredness around his eyes was more visible in the morning light from the window. Because $2 billion moving through my city without my knowledge is a problem I need to resolve, he said. And right now, you're the only person alive who can help me map it. Honest. Probably more honest than she'd expected. She nodded. All right. Pack whatever they brought you. We leave in 20 minutes. He walked out. The door didn't slam. It closed with the quiet precision of everything else around him, everything calibrated, nothing wasted. Ivy sat with her hands around the cold coffee cup and thought about the building on Harbor View Drive, about the room with the oversized ventilation system, about the walls that she'd touched with her own hands, that she'd selected finishes for, that she'd signed off on with her professional stamp. She thought about 3 accountants who had disappeared. She thought about the drive Marcus didn't know she had. She stood up, went to the bedroom, began packing the small amount of nothing that constituted everything she currently owned. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She looked at it. A text message. 1 line. No identifier. We know where you are. Come home, Ivy. This can still end quietly. She stared at the message for 4 seconds. Then she screenshotted it, texted it to the number Reyes had left her, and dropped the phone into the bag. 20 minutes. She'd be ready in 15. But as she zipped the bag and reached for her jacket, she heard something that stopped her completely. A sound from outside the window, from the street 5 floors below. The particular idle of a specific kind of engine, the frequency she'd learned to recognize in 3 years of being monitored, the sound of a vehicle that was parked but running, patient, the way machines are patient because they don't get tired. She moved to the window. stayed to one side of the curtain, looked down at an angle. Black sedan, tinted, 2 doors, and standing on the sidewalk beside it, with rain on his shoulders and his face turned up toward the building's facade, was a man she didn't recognize. Not Marcus, not anyone she could place, but his attention was fixed on the building with the particular quality of someone who already knew exactly which floor they were looking for. Her phone buzzed again. Different number this time. A number she didn't recognize at all, with an area code that wasn't Seattle. The text was 4 words. Check what's on it. She stared at the screen. Read it again. Check what's on it. She had no idea what that meant or who had sent it. She sent it to Reyes the same way she'd sent the first one. No response. And then, because she had spent 3 years learning to pay attention to the things that didn't add up, she thought about the drive Marcus didn't know she had, the professional archive, the cloud account. And she thought, what if she was wrong about what he knew? What if he'd found it already? What if he'd been in it? What if everything she thought she'd hidden was already in his hands, and the only question remaining was what he'd found there that had made him not just want her back, but want her back quietly? The sedan on the street hadn't moved. She heard a sound from the apartment hallway. Not the door opening. Something else. Smaller, like a phone being clicked off, like someone outside who had been on a call and had just finished it and was now simply present. She picked up the bag. She walked to the kitchen. She said, "We need to leave now," to the empty room, because someone was monitoring the apartment and she knew it, and she needed whoever was listening to hear that she was moving. 3 seconds later, Reyes appeared in the doorway with her hand on the inside of her jacket and an expression that had shifted into something professionally alert. "Front door or back?" Ivy asked. Reyes looked at her, reassessed something. "You saw the street." "Yes." "Back," Reyes said. "Now." They moved. And somewhere on the 5th floor of a Capitol Hill building, in the apartment that had been meant to be. The back stairwell smelled like wet concrete and old paint and the specific kind of cold that accumulates in spaces nobody uses. Reyes moved fast and silent, and Ivy followed 2 steps behind, one hand trailing the rail because the overhead light on the 3rd floor landing had burned out, and the dark there was absolute. Her bag pulled at her shoulder. She hadn't packed much. There wasn't much to pack, but it felt heavier than it was, the way everything felt heavier when your body was still running on adrenaline and 3 hours of ceiling staring that hadn't come close to sleep. 2nd floor. First. A metal door with a crash bar. Reyes stopped before pushing it, pressed her ear sideways toward the gap, listened with her whole body, shoulders forward, weight distributed, the kind of attention that wasn't performed. 4 seconds. She hit the bar and they went through into an alley that smelled like restaurant grease and rain-soaked cardboard, and a dark SUV was already there with its rear door open and the engine running, and Ivy got in without being told because there was nothing left in her that wanted to argue about logistics. The door closed. The vehicle moved. Reyes got in the front, said something into her earpiece that Ivy couldn't catch over the sound of tires on wet asphalt. Ivy turned to look through the rear window at the building receding. The 5th floor, the window of the apartment where the door handle had been turning. Nobody came out of the building after them. That was the part that bothered her. Dante was already at the 2nd location when they arrived, a ground-level office space in Sodo that looked from the outside like an import consulting firm, and from the inside like a place where serious people had serious conversations with no decorative concessions. Exposed ductwork, polished concrete floors, 4 workstations running screens full of financial data that Ivy didn't look at directly, not yet, because she felt the information pressure of this room like a physical thing and she needed a few seconds to calibrate. He was standing at a long table with 2 other people, a man in his 50s who carried himself with the careful neutrality of someone trained to absorb information without reacting to it, and a younger woman whose eyes moved to Ivy the moment she entered and stayed there with an assessment quality that wasn't hostile but wasn't warm either. Dante looked up, took in Reyes's expression first, then Ivy's face. "The front door," he said. Not a question. "Handle was moving when we exited," Reyes said. "Sedan on the street, 1 spotter visible. Professional. They knew the floor." How long after we placed her? 6 hours, maybe 7. The older man at the table said, "That's too fast for a trace on extraction." His voice was flat, Boston accent worn smooth by years somewhere else. "That's inside information." The word inside fell into the room and nobody picked it up immediately. It sat there in the concrete and the fluorescent light and did what it was designed to do, which was make everyone in the room look at everyone else with a fraction more suspicion than they'd had 30 seconds ago. Ivy watched it happen. She'd spent 3 years reading rooms. It was the skill marriage to Marcus had most efficiently honed. And she watched the micro-adjustments, the shoulders that didn't quite relax, the eye contact that was held a beat too long by 2 people and avoided entirely by 1. She noted which person avoided it. "Someone tell me about the text messages," Dante said. Reyes pulled out her phone, put both screenshots on the table. Dante looked at them, passed them to the Boston man without comment. "We know where you are," the man read. First message, 32 minutes after extraction, from a number that traces to a burner purchased in Tacoma 6 weeks ago. He set it down. Second message, check what's on it. Different burner, different purchase location, Bellevue, 2 months ago. These weren't bought together. 2 different senders, Dante said, or one sender who planned ahead. Ivy said, or someone who was trying to warn me. Everyone looked at her. She hadn't meant to say it aloud, but it had been in her mind since the stairwell. The specific texture of the second text, the way it felt different from the first. The first was Marcus, or someone working for Marcus. She'd recognized the syntax, the particular combination of reassurance and threat that she'd lived with for 3 years, that specific grammar of control. The second one felt like something else. It felt like someone who knew what she had and wanted her to look at it before someone else got there first. "You think it was a friendly contact," the Boston man said. "I think it was someone who knows what's on that drive," Ivy said. "And I think they're scared." Dante looked at her for a moment, then at Reyes. "Get her access to the archive. Full pull, local copy, isolated machine." He turned back to the table. "Garrity, I want to know who else has been running surveillance on Capitol Hill in the last 48 hours. Not our people. Cross-reference with any federal activity." The Boston man, Garrity, nodded and moved to a workstation without another word. The younger woman was still watching Ivy. Finally, she said, "You're an interior designer." "Yes." "And you think your project files are evidence of a $2 billion laundering operation." "I think my project files document architectural modifications that serve no legitimate design purpose," Ivy said. "What those modifications were built to conceal is your job to determine, not mine." A pause. The woman's expression shifted, not to warmth, but to something that might eventually become respect under different circumstances. "I'm Tran," she said. "I handle financial intelligence." "Ivy." "I know who you are." She pulled a laptop toward her. "Sit down. Show me what you have." It took 2 hours. Ivy walked Tran through the archive methodically, project by project, property by property, every photograph and change order and material specification that she'd cataloged over 4 years of professional work that she now understood had never been entirely her own. Marcus had steered every high-value commission. She saw that clearly now, with the distance that terror provides. He had presented the clients as referrals from his network, had framed every project as a professional opportunity, had made himself the invisible hand that positioned her talent in exactly the places that needed someone with her particular combination of skills and documented access. She had been useful. She had been deployed. She had been so busy surviving the marriage that she'd never examined what else she was being used for. That realization had a specific quality of nausea that she swallowed down and set aside because there was no room for it right now. Tran didn't comment on the emotional dimensions. She asked precise, structural questions. Load capacity here, ceiling height there, the exact specification of the ventilation units on Harbor View Drive, the dimensions of the corridor that didn't match the exterior permits. She took notes in a system that appeared to be her own shorthand and cross-referenced things on the financial data screens with the fluency that told Ivy she'd already known parts of this picture and was now fitting in pieces she'd been missing. Around the 90-minute mark, Tran stopped typing. She sat very still, looking at the screen. "What?" Ivy said. Tran turned the laptop so Ivy could see. A property record. The waterfront event space Ivy had renovated. The one with the unusual subfloor specifications she'd noted and moved past. This property transferred ownership 8 months ago, Tran said. The new holding company is registered in Delaware, with a Cayman beneficial owner we can't penetrate. But the transfer happened 11 days after one of the missing accountants disappeared. She paused. His last known activity was requesting the change orders for this building. The room felt very quiet. He saw the same thing I'm looking at right now, Ivy said. Yes. And then he disappeared. Yes. Tran closed the laptop. I need to bring Dante in on this. She stood, walked toward the back of the space where Dante was talking to Garrity over a workstation screen. Ivy watched the conversation, watched Dante's face as Tran spoke. The way it didn't change expression, but the quality of his stillness shifted, became more concentrated. He looked over at Ivy from across the room. She looked back. She thought, 3 accountants. She thought, what I know is worth killing for. She thought, I walked out of my house 12 hours ago, and I have no idea what I've walked into. She thought all of this, and she didn't look away from Dante Castellano's gaze because she was done looking away from things. It was Garrity who broke the contained professional atmosphere of the morning. He did it at 11:47 a.m., standing up from his workstation with the deliberate control of someone choosing not to show the thing they're feeling, which paradoxically made the thing visible. We have a federal problem, he said. Dante crossed his arms. Elaborate. The surveillance on Capitol Hill wasn't just Marcus's people. Garrity pulled up a screen, turned it toward the room. Aerial footage, grainy, time-stamped from 2 hours earlier. A street-level view of the Capitol Hill building they'd extracted Ivy from. 3 vehicles visible. The black sedan Ivy had spotted from the window, and 2 others she hadn't seen, positioned at the block's far corners. The sedan is private, Garrity said. The other 2 are federal. Different agency markings, but I've got confirmation from a source, FBI, and what looks like a financial crimes unit running parallel. They're watching Marcus, Tran said. They're watching the building we put her in, Garrity said. Which means either they were already tracking Marcus's people and got lucky when his people found us, or they were already tracking us, Dante said. The room processed that. Ivy said, how worried should I be about that? Dante looked at her. Depends on what the federal interest is. You're being calm about this. I'm always calm. I noticed, she said. It's not as reassuring as you might think. Something moved at the corner of his mouth again. That almost expression that she was beginning to recognize as the closest he came to an unguarded reaction. Garrity cleared his throat. There's a secondary issue. Go ahead. The Financial Crimes Unit. Their operation has a code name in the intercept I received. The operation predates our involvement by 14 months. He paused. But our organization appears in their file. In the background, not as a target. He stopped. As a what, Garrity? Garrity looked at him steadily. As an asset. Someone with access to our operation has been feeding information to a federal investigation for over a year. Silence. A different quality of silence than before. This one had edges. Reyes was standing near the door. She hadn't moved during Garrity's entire report. Now she said very quietly, how specific is the file? Specific enough, Garrity said. Operational details, safe house locations, personnel structure. He didn't look at Reyes, he looked at Dante. Someone close. Dante uncrossed his arms. He moved to the window, the one covered with a shade, and stood with his back to the room for approximately 4 seconds, which, given his general economy of movement, was a long time. When he turned back, his expression was exactly the same as it had always been, and that was the most frightening thing Ivy had seen since the door handle turning. Nobody leaves this building until I say, he said. Everyone's devices go to Tran for audit. Now. Reyes said, Dante. Now, Reyes. A beat. 2. Reyes reached into her jacket and put her phone on the nearest table. The gesture was controlled, but Ivy, who had spent years watching people navigate the specific terror of complying with something they couldn't argue their way out of, saw what it cost her. One by one, the phones went on the table. Tran collected them with the careful neutrality of someone who understood that what she was doing would damage relationships in this room, regardless of what she found. Ivy looked at her own phone in her hand, the burner Reyes had given her. She set it on the table with the others. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Garrity said, "There's one more thing. I should have led with it." His voice had changed slightly, a tightening. "The third missing accountant, the one who disappeared 8 months ago, tied to the waterfront property. What about him?" "He didn't disappear," Garrity said. "He's in federal protective custody, has been for 6 months, which means he's been talking for 6 months. He let that land. "And if he's been talking for 6 months, and the federal file on this operation is 14 months old, then there's a second source," Tran said. "Then there's a second source," Garrity confirmed. "One that predates the accountant, one that was already inside before he ever came forward." Ivy watched Dante. His jaw tightened once, briefly, barely visible, and released. "All right," he said. It was almost nothing, just 2 syllables, but the word had a quality of reorganization in it. Everything she could see about him was visibly recalibrating. "Tran, what's on that drive of hers, specifically the Harbor View property? Can we tie the construction modifications to a specific decision-maker in the syndicate?" Tran pulled her notes. "Potentially. The change orders were approved by a project manager named Feld, Eric Feld. His signature is on 6 of the 9 anomalous modifications. Find Feld. He's not in the system. Find him anyway. Dante." Garrity's voice. Careful now. "If the federal case is already 14 months in, and they have the accountant talking, they're close to indictment. If we move on this independently—" "We're not moving independently," Dante said. "We're protecting an asset and mapping an organization that's been operating in my city without my knowledge." His voice didn't rise. It never rose. But it filled the room differently now. Not louder, just with more density, the way water pressure increases with depth. "Whatever the federal timeline is, it doesn't change our problem. If the syndicate collapses under indictment before we identify who's running the financial layer, that money doesn't go away. It rotes through someone else, somewhere else. And whoever ordered 3 people to disappear is still out there and still operational." He looked at Ivy. "Which means she's still a target." Ivy met his eyes. "I understood that before you said it." "I know." He looked away, looked at no one in particular for a moment, something working in him that wasn't visible. "Give me the room, except Calloway." People moved. Tran took the phones. Garrity took his coffee. Reyes walked out last, and as she passed the table, she put her hand flat on it briefly, not grabbing anything, just touching the surface. A gesture so small that Ivy almost missed it. She didn't miss it. The door closed. Dante sat down across from her. He looked tired in the morning light from the shade-filtered window. He looked like a man who was used to being several moves ahead of everyone in the room and had just discovered that someone had been playing a different game entirely. "You're thinking about Reyes," Ivy said. He didn't answer immediately. "You've been watching her," he said. "You gave me nothing else to watch." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Reyes has been with me for 8 years. "I know that's not a reassurance," Ivy said. "You know it too, or you wouldn't have cleared the room." He looked at her. The tiredness around his eyes was more visible now than it had been at 7 that morning. "You read people," he said. "I had to learn how." "Your husband." "Yes." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. He had the shape of it from the night before, and she didn't want to give it more space than it needed right now. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. Not a casual posture, but everything about him was intentional. But it reduced the formal distance between them by a few degrees. "What Garrity said about the inside source. I need to know. Is there anything Marcus said to you in 3 years of marriage that suggested he had information about my operation?" She thought. She went through the archive of overheard calls and dropped names and the visitors who came without being introduced, and she ran it against this new frame. And she found something. It was small. 18 months ago. A phone call Marcus had taken in the study. She'd heard it because the door was ajar and she'd been in the hallway and she'd learned not to appear to be listening. "He won't move on it. He's too cautious about Seattle right now. Stay parallel. Don't cross him." She hadn't known what it meant. She'd filed it and moved on because survival required filing and moving on. She told Dante what she remembered, every word she could reconstruct. His face while she spoke was very still. When she finished, he sat back. "Don't cross him," he repeated quietly. "Yes. That's a conversation about me." "I think so." He was quiet for longer than usual. She could see him processing it, sorting it, placing it against everything else he knew. "Someone in my organization has been talking to Marcus Wren's people," he said. "Not just to the federal investigation, to the syndicate directly." "That's what it sounds like." "Which means the information flow goes both ways. Whoever is inside has been managing both relationships." "Yes," she paused. "That's a very specific kind of person." He looked at her. "Someone who understood early that the federal case and your operation would eventually collide," she said, "and who positioned themselves to profit from both sides of that collision." She stopped. "Or to survive it." He stood up, moved to the window again. She had the impression he thought better on his feet and near exits, the same way she thought better when she could see all four walls of a room. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, still facing the shade, "about why I got involved in this." "You said $2 billion in your city." "That's true," he said. "It's not complete." He turned. 3 months ago, I received information that Marcus Wren was building a case against me, compiling evidence, transactions, operational records that he intended to use as leverage or to hand to federal prosecutors in exchange for immunity in whatever was coming for his financial operation. He looked at her steadily. "I had a team looking for a way into his inner circle, a way to understand how much he actually had and what he planned to do with it." She understood what he was telling her. She let it arrive fully before she responded. "So when I called," she said. "You were already inside his house," Dante said. "You already had access I'd been trying to establish for 3 months. And whatever you'd managed to archive without his knowledge was already exactly what you were looking for." "Yes." She held that. The room was very still around her. The fluorescent light hummed. "You should have told me this morning," she said. "Yes." "Why didn't you?" He met her eyes. No apology in it, but something that she recognized after a moment as the closest thing to accountability she'd ever seen from a man who was accustomed to operating without it. "Because I needed to know what you had before I told you what I needed," he said. "And because I was not certain you would stay if you understood the full picture at the start. You needed me compliant. I needed you cooperative. Those are the same word." "They're not," he said, "but I understand why you'd see them that way." He didn't look away. "I'm telling you now." She stood up, walked to the window beside him, stopped 2 feet away, looked at the shade covering whatever city was outside. "Marcus had a case against you," she said. "Evidence, transactions, and records." She thought. Where was he keeping it? "We don't know." She turned her head and looked at him. Something had arrived in her mind with the particular clarity of a thing that had been approaching for hours and had finally gotten close enough to see. "I do," she said. He looked at her. "The house," she said. "There's a room in the East Wing that I never had access to. I thought it was a home office, private, normal for someone like Marcus, but..." She stopped, working it through out loud. "He had the security system upgraded 14 months ago, independently. He brought in an outside contractor, paid cash, I remember, because he asked me to arrange access for them, and then specifically told me not to be in the house while they worked. 3 days. Dante was very still. "A 14-month-old security upgrade," he said. 2 months after the federal investigation opened, if Garrity's timeline is right. She felt the shape of it clicking into place like a floor plan resolving. He knew. He knew something was coming. He built a room to protect whatever he had. And he never, not once in 14 months, did he give me any reason to look at that room, because he was very careful about what I looked at and what I didn't, and the one thing he made absolutely off limits was the East Wing office," Dante said. "Was the East Wing office," she confirmed. They stood next to each other at the covered window in the so-dough light, and the weight of what she'd just described settled between them. "Can you get back into that house?" he asked. "Not without being seen." "That's not what I asked." She thought about the house. The layout she knew better than any structure she'd ever designed because she'd been trapped inside it. The service entrance, the kitchen door that used the same keypad code Marcus had never changed because he trusted his own systems more than he trusted varying his habits. The East Wing corridor, the door she'd passed 100 times and never touched. "Yes," she said. "But if Marcus is looking for me as a liability now, I'll have people with you." "Your people have a leak." He said nothing, because there was nothing to say to that. She turned to face him fully. This close, she could see that the gray at his temple was more extensive than it appeared at a distance, and that his eyes were not simply dark, but a specific shade of brown that the fluorescent light caught at a particular angle, and none of that was relevant, and she was aware of noticing it anyway. "Get me back into that house," she said, "and I will get you whatever is in that room, but I need something in return." "Name it." "When this is over, when Marcus is done, when the syndicate is done, when the federal case closes, I walk, clean, no debts, no ongoing relationship with your organization. No one comes to me later with requests framed as favors." He held her gaze. "Agreed. I need that in a form that means something. My word means something." She looked at him. She thought about what 3 years of trusting a man who made promises had cost her. She thought about what it felt like to calibrate trust when your calibration instrument had been systematically damaged. She said, I'll take it for now." He nodded once. She turned back toward the table, toward the archived plans and the evidence she'd been carrying inside her memory for 3 years without knowing its weight. "We should move tonight," she said. "If Marcus is looking for me as a liability, he may move whatever's in that room in the next 24 hours. She paused. "And there's something else." "What?" "The second text. Check what's on it. It was sent 2 hours before Garrity identified the federal surveillance. Someone knew we were about to discover that the federal case existed. Someone was telling me to get to the drive before the picture changed." She picked up the folder of documents from the table, "which means whoever sent it knows what's on that drive, and they wanted me to have it before anyone else did." "An ally," Dante said. "Or someone managing their own position," she said. "Like I said, a very specific kind of person." She opened the folder, and there, inside, beneath the financial records Tran had assembled, beneath the property documents, clipped to the back of a change order for the Harbor View project, was a photograph she had never seen before. Not her photograph, not something from her archive. A photograph of a woman she didn't recognize, standing outside the east wing of Marcus Wren's house, at night, looking directly at the camera with the calm expression of someone who knew they were being photographed and had chosen to stand still for it. On the back of the photograph, in handwriting she didn't recognize, were 7 words. "She's already been inside. Ask Dante who she is." Ivy turned around. Dante was looking at the photograph in her hand with an expression she had never seen on him before. The first time in 24 hours that something had genuinely broken through whatever architecture he maintained between his face and what was happening behind it. She held the photograph up. "Who is she?" Ivy said. And Dante Castellano, who was never caught without an answer, said nothing at all. Afe, the front door handle began, very, very slowly, to turn. The silence from Dante Castellano lasted exactly 6 seconds. Ivy counted them. She'd developed the habit in marriage, counting the seconds of dangerous silence, calibrating what was coming on the other side of them. 6 seconds from Marcus usually meant something thrown. 6 seconds from Dante meant something different, something internal. A structure being rapidly dismantled and rebuilt behind a face that gave nothing away. She kept the photograph extended between them. Her arm didn't waver. "Who is she?" Ivy said again. Not louder, just more certain. He crossed the room and took the photograph from her hand. His fingers didn't touch hers. He held it at an angle, looked at it the way someone looks at a thing they'd hoped never to see in a specific context, and the muscle along his jaw moved once. "Her name is Sable Voss," he said. And he set the photograph face down on the table, not to hide it from Ivy. She'd already seen it, but with a deliberateness that suggested he couldn't look at it and speak at the same time. "She worked for me," he said. "Financial intelligence. Before Tran." "Before Tran," Ivy repeated. "How long before?" "She left the organization 2 years ago." "Left." "Separated," he said. The circumstances were... He stopped. Started again. There was a discrepancy in an internal audit. Money moved in a way that suggested she'd been building a parallel account structure outside the organization's oversight. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. She said she was building an exit. He paused. I let her walk because the money was recoverable and because I believed she was simply protecting herself, not working against us. Ivy looked at the back of the photograph on the table. The handwriting. She's already been inside. Ask Dante who she is. Someone put that in your files, she said. Someone who knew I'd be looking through them. Someone who knew I'd show it to you. Yes. So whoever sent it knows your organization well enough to know that Sable Voss is a name that would... She searched for the word. Land. Yes. And they wanted me to see your reaction. He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted. Not defensiveness, but a kind of recognition, the look of someone who has just been accurately described. You were being tested, Ivy said, by whoever put that photograph there. And so was I, depending on how you reacted. He said nothing for a moment. Then, you're doing it again. Doing what? Reading the room instead of being in it. I'm in it, she said. I'm just also reading it. She picked the photograph back up, turned it over, looked at the woman again. Dark coat. Standing in the specific way of someone who'd made a decision and was past arguing with it. She was outside his house at night, at the East Wing specifically. She looked up. She knew what was in that room. If she was involved with Marcus's operation, she wasn't involved with his operation, Ivy said. Look at her face. She's not surveilling. She's not casing. She's standing there like she's about to go in or just come out, and she knows exactly what she's doing and has accepted everything that comes with it. She paused. She was working against him, same as us. Dante picked up the phone, not his personal device, one of the encrypted handsets Tron had cleared, and made a call that lasted 40 seconds. He said 3 things: a name, a location request, and a timeline. He ended the call. We'll know where she is by tonight, he said. We need to know now, Ivy said. If she's already been inside that East Wing room... The door opened. Tran came in fast, which was unusual enough that both of them turned. Tran moved with efficiency as a baseline, not urgency. Urgency on Tran's face was a different register entirely. Garrity needs you, she said to Dante. Both of you. Garrity was standing in front of a screen showing a property schematic that Ivy recognized before she fully understood that she recognized it. The Harbor View building, her blueprints, her change orders, the specific corridor dimensions she'd described to Tron 2 hours ago. But overlaid on her plans was a second set of markings, different color, different origin, that mapped additional modifications she had never seen, had never approved, had never been told about. Modifications made after her work was complete. Someone went back in, she said. 3 months after your renovation closed, Garrity confirmed. Different contractor, no permits. I checked twice. Cash transaction, untraceable company. They added 2 things. He pointed. A ventilation bypass that connects the basement room to a duct network running beneath the foundation. And this. He zoomed to a section of the basement floor plan. A room within a room. A space that didn't appear on any exterior documentation, accessible only through a panel in the false back wall of the storage area, with dimensions that Ivy immediately registered as precisely calibrated to house server infrastructure and maintain the temperature required for sustained hardware operation. A data vault, Tran said from behind Ivy, hidden inside the building you designed. Ivy felt the floor of her stomach drop. He used my renovation as the shell, she said. My permits, my documentation, my professional stamp. That's what gave the building its paper legitimacy. The storage room, the oversized ventilation, the modified corridors, those were all framed as my specifications. If anyone ever scrutinized the building, the paper trail leads to my design choices. Which means the liability, Garrity started. Which means he set me up, she said flatly. 3 years ago, maybe longer. He positioned me specifically to be the documented professional responsible for buildings he was using for criminal infrastructure. She stopped, breathed. If this ever went to prosecution, I'm on the change orders. I'm on the permits. I signed off on every modification that made these buildings functional for what they were actually used for. The room was quiet. He didn't just control your personal life, Dante said. His voice was level, but there was something underneath it, a tightness she hadn't heard before. He engineered your professional exposure as insurance. Yes. If he goes down, he takes you with him. That was always the plan, she said. She heard her own voice from a distance. Too calm, she thought, too steady for what she was feeling. But the steadiness was the only thing keeping her functional, so she held on to it. I was never his wife. I was his contingency. Nobody offered anything to soften that. She didn't want it softened. She looked at the screen, at her own blueprints annotated with modifications she'd never made, at the data vault hidden inside her work. What's in the vault? She said. Do we know? Garrity pulled up a second screen. Based on the server specifications, we can infer from the thermal imaging the federal unit ran on the building last month, which Tran found in the intercept files. The vault is running active hardware, climate-controlled, powered independently, with an encrypted uplink that pings a satellite relay every 6 hours. It's live, Dante said. It's live, Garrity confirmed. Whatever's on those servers isn't archived. It's active. Real-time surveillance data, most likely, given the uplink frequency. Continuous recording, Much Ivy said. The house. Everyone looked at her. Marcus told me 14 months ago that he'd upgraded the security system at the house. I assumed it was property security, cameras, motion sensors. But if the vault is running active surveillance, she stopped, working through the architectural logic the way she'd always worked through spatial problems, from the structure outward. The security upgrade wasn't for the house. It was an uplink installation. The house is the primary feed source. Everything happening in the house, every conversation, every meeting, every person who walked through has been recorded and uploaded to those servers in real time for 14 months. Tran said very quietly, every meeting Marcus hosted. Every meeting, Ivy confirmed. Garrity sat down heavily. He's been recording his own partners, his own syndicate contacts. Anyone who came to that house for business has been archived, Dante said. Names, faces, conversations, every transaction discussed, every order given. He was silent for a moment. He built his own insurance policy against everyone above him. And below him, Tran said. Ivy said, including you. Dante looked at her. If you ever came to that house, she said, or sent anyone who came to that house, I was never in that house, he said. But Sable Voss was, Ivy said, outside it, at minimum. If she went inside, he picked up the handset again, made another call. This one lasted 8 seconds. When he ended it, his face had changed in a way she couldn't fully categorize, tighter around the eyes, more deliberate in how he held his shoulders. Sable Voss is in Seattle, he said. She's been here for 3 weeks. You didn't know, Ivy said. No. Is that unusual? He looked at her steadily. Yes. She thought about what that meant. Someone who'd been inside his organization, who'd left under circumstances that were allowed rather than forced, who had returned to the same city and remained invisible to his network for 3 weeks. Someone skilled enough to place a photograph inside files in a secure facility. Someone who had been outside Marcus's house at night and wanted Dante to know it. She's not hiding from you, Ivy said. She's waiting for you to find her. Why? Because she has something, Ivy said, and she doesn't want to walk it in. She wants to be retrieved. She wants to control the terms of the exchange. Dante turned to Garrity. Find her, tonight. Already running it? Garrity said. They found Sable Voss at 4:17 in the afternoon, in a rented room above a Vietnamese restaurant in the International District, which struck Ivy, when she was told, as either very brave or very calculated, a location chosen for its noise, its foot traffic, its multiple exits, its distance from the neighborhoods where Dante's organizational footprint was densest. Dante went with Reyes and one other person Ivy hadn't been introduced to. He told Ivy to stay in the SODU office. She agreed. Then she waited 11 minutes and told Tran she needed air, walked down the back hallway to the secondary exit, and got into the car that had been idling there. Not because she'd arranged it, but because she'd noticed it when they arrived and it was still there, and the driver, when she opened the door and said Dante's name, nodded once and drove without asking where. She caught up to them in the stairwell of the building above the restaurant, because Reyes had held the street-level approach longer than expected. She heard it in the radio chatter she wasn't supposed to be able to hear from the open door of the third-floor landing. And when Dante turned and saw her on the stairs, his expression completed a full arc from surprise to controlled anger to something that wasn't quite resignation. "I told you. I know what you told me," she said. "But Sable Voss placed that photograph for me, not for you. If she sees you come in without me, she'll know the delivery failed." A moment, long enough to matter. "Stay behind Reyes," he said. "Don't speak first." "Don't manage me," she said. He turned and went up the stairs. Boss. Room 304 smelled like old carpet and fryer oil from the restaurant below, and the specific staleness of a space where someone had been living carefully. No personal items visible, surfaces wiped, a single bag packed near the door in the way of someone who expected to leave quickly and wanted the leaving to cost nothing. Sable Voss was sitting at the room's small table. She was younger than the photograph had suggested, early 30s, with a precision about her face that came from features arranged efficiently rather than beautifully, and eyes that moved to Ivy first, then Dante, with a sequence that confirmed everything Ivy had theorized about the photograph. She'd been waiting for both of them. "You brought her," Sable said. Not surprised. Satisfied in a contained way. "You made sure I would," Dante said. He stayed near the door. Reyes flanked right. The unnamed third person took the left. Standard geometry, Ivy noted, and she noted it from outside the geometry because no one had positioned her anywhere. "Sit down, Dante," Sable said. "I'll stand." "That's fine." Sable looked at Ivy. "You found the photograph." "You made it findable," Ivy said. "I needed to know if you were paying attention." She tilted her head slightly. "You are." "Stop performing," Dante said. His voice had an edge in it she hadn't heard before. Not quite cold, not quite angry, something that required more familiarity with him to name, which she didn't have. "You've been in my city for 3 weeks without contact. You placed evidence in a secure location. Tell me what you have." Sable looked at him for a moment. Something passed across her face. Not fear, but a recognition of stakes. "I've been inside Marcus Wren's house," she said. "The East Wing," Ivy said. Sable looked at her again. "Yes." "The surveillance system. The uplink to the vault at Harbor View." Sable's expression shifted by a fraction. "You've been busy." "Tell me what's on the servers," Ivy said. "Everything," Sable said. 14 months of continuous recording, but that's not—" She stopped. Repositioned. "The recording is valuable, yes. The syndicate partners exposed on those recordings are significant. But that's not why I'm here. That's not what I need you to understand." She looked directly at Dante. 3 weeks ago, before I came back to Seattle, I was in Vancouver. I met with a man named Theo Strand. Does that name register? Dante's expression didn't change. But Ivy, who was watching him the way she'd watched everything in the last 24 hours, saw his right hand close briefly, then release. "Strand is one of the financial architects of the syndicate," Tran said from behind Ivy. Ivy hadn't heard her come in, hadn't known she'd followed. Tran moved to stand beside her with the composure of someone who had decided to be exactly where they were and couldn't be argued out of it. "Strand approached me," Sable said. "He knew I'd left Dante's organization. He knew why. He made an offer. My financial expertise, my knowledge of Dante's operational structure, in exchange for a position inside the syndicate's integration layer." She paused. "He was recruiting." "You accepted," Dante said. "I accepted," she confirmed. There was no apology in it. "I needed inside access to the syndicate, and he was handing me an open door. I spent 3 weeks as Strand's operational consultant. I saw the full financial architecture, the offshore structures, the integration pipeline, the people at every layer." She reached beneath the table, retrieved a drive, small, black, unremarkable. Set it on the table. Everything I documented is on that. Nobody moved toward the drive. Why bring it to us? Dante said. If you were inside the syndicate, that position has value. Strand trusted you enough to show you the architecture. You could have traded that to the federal investigation directly. I couldn't, Sable said. Why? She looked at him. Something settled in her expression, something that had been braced and now released, the particular exhaustion of someone who has been holding a specific weight for a specific amount of time and has finally reached the place where they can set it down. Because Strand told me something in Vancouver that changes every calculation, she said, about why the federal investigation has been running for 14 months without reaching indictment, about why 3 accountants disappeared before they could testify formally, about why the surveillance operation on this city has been compromised from the inside. We know about the inside source, Dante said. You know there is one, Sable said. You don't know who. She looked at him. I do. The room was absolutely still. Strand gave me a name, she said. He gave it to me because he was testing me, seeing whether I'd react, seeing whether the name meant anything to me, seeing if he could trust me with it. I gave him nothing. I sat across from him and I absorbed it, and I gave him nothing. She paused. The name he gave me was the name of the person feeding information from inside the Federal Financial Crimes Unit to the syndicate, the person who has been suppressing evidence, redirecting surveillance, and compromising every move the federal investigation has made for over a year. Dante said, Give me the name. Sable looked at him. The name is Garrity. The silence that followed had a specific quality, the quality of a foundation crack that appears suddenly and forces a complete reassessment of everything built on top of it. Ivy turned, looked at the door. The doorway was empty. Garrity had been in the So-Do office when they left. He'd been at his workstation. He had access to every intercept, every location, every operational file they'd assembled in the last 24 hours. He had access to this location. He knows we're here, Ivy said. Dante was already moving. Hand signaled to Reyes, one sharp gesture, and the room reorganized itself in seconds. Reyes to the window, the third operative to the door, Tran pulling the drive from the table. But Sable was shaking her head. He's not coming here, she said. Strand gave me the name because Garrity already completed his function. The information he's been feeding isn't about your operations anymore. It's about the federal timeline. She looked at Dante. Strand knows the indictment is coming. He knows the servers at Harborview will be seized. He's been using Garrity to manage the pace, delay, redirect, compromise. But the case has progressed past the point where suppression is possible. She paused. So Strand changed the strategy. He's not trying to stop the federal case anymore. He's trying to control what's on those servers before they're seized, Tran said. He's trying to destroy them, Sable said. The Harborview building. Tonight. Garrity filed a permit this morning. I intercepted it through the same channel I was using to monitor federal activity. Structural assessment, emergency basis, signed by a contractor who doesn't exist. It gives legal cover for a crew to access the building with equipment. The server room won't burn. They know a fire triggers federal response too fast. They'll use the ventilation bypass. The same bypass that was added after Ivy's renovation. A chemical agent through the duct system destroys the hardware without external evidence of arson. Ivy looked at her own hands. The ventilation bypass. The modification she'd noticed and cataloged and not understood. The modification that would now be used to destroy the only complete record of 14 months of criminal activity, using the ductwork she had specified in a building bearing her professional credentials. When tonight, Dante said. The permit is for an 8 p.m. access window, Sable said. Standard cover. Evening hours, minimal staff in adjacent buildings. Dante checked his watch. It was 4:51 p.m. 3 hours, Reyes said. Less, Tran said. If they move early to account for any federal activity, we need to move now, Dante said. He looked at Sable. You're coming with us. I assumed, she said. She stood without particular haste, picked up her bag by the door, and looked at Ivy with an expression that was the first genuinely unguarded thing Ivy had seen in this room. I'm sorry about the setup, Sable said. The photograph, the drive. I needed someone who would stay connected to Dante long enough to get to the truth, and I needed her to be someone he couldn't dismiss, someone already inside the situation. She paused. You were already inside the situation. Ivy looked at her. You used me too. Yes, Sable said. No qualifier, no softening. Everyone in this story has used me, Ivy said. Yes, Sable said again, but I'm the only one telling you so directly. Make of that what you want. They went down the stairs fast, into the alley, into vehicles that were already moving before the doors fully closed, and Ivy sat in the back with her bag on her knees, and Tran beside her reviewing the drive on an isolated device. And she thought about the ventilation bypass and the ductwork she'd designed, and the building on Harborview Drive where 14 months of recorded crime was stored on servers that were going to be chemically destroyed in less than 3 hours unless they did something to stop it. She thought about Garrity, about the 8 years Dante had described in a different context, the duration of trust that made betrayal not just a tactical problem, but something that sat differently in the chest. She looked at Dante in the front seat, his profile in the window, the line of his jaw, the deliberate stillness of someone recalibrating a world that had just fundamentally changed shape. The Garrity question, she said. He didn't turn around. Not now. It will need to be now, she said. If he knows where Harborview is, and he knows what we know, he doesn't know what we know, Dante said. He doesn't know we have Sable. He doesn't know we know the timeline. He paused. For approximately the next 2 hours, he thinks he has a lead on us. And after 2 hours? After 2 hours, it won't matter. Because either we've secured the servers, Tran said, not looking up from the device in her hands, or we haven't, and nothing after that is recoverable. Ivy looked out the window. Seattle moved past, gray and rain-streaked and ordinary, the city that had been conducting its enormous criminal business behind the facades of luxury properties and legitimate companies and the professional work of people like her who had been positioned precisely and never told why. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. The drive she'd given to Tran was the cloud archive copy, what Tran had pulled and analyzed, but Ivy still had access credentials to the original cloud account on her personal device. A notification from the cloud service. An automated alert. Your account was accessed from an unrecognized device. Location, Capitol Hill, Seattle. Time, 4:44 p.m. Someone had accessed her professional archive, her original files. 7 minutes ago, while they were in Sable's room. Not a copy. The source. She showed the screen to Tran without speaking. Tran looked at it, looked at her, looked at the front seat. Dante, Tran said. I see it, he said. He'd been watching in the rear view. Garrity wasn't waiting for us to find Sable. He was buying time. He paused. He's already inside her archive, which means he knows we know about Harborview, which means the timeline just moved. How far? Reyes said. Far enough, he said. He pulled out the encrypted handset, started a call, then stopped before it connected because Sable said from the far corner of the back seat where she'd been silent for the last 3 minutes, Don't use that line. He turned, looked at her. That handset was issued from your secure communication system, Sable said. Garrity has administrative access to your secure communication system, has had for 8 years. Dante looked at the handset in his hand, at the device he'd been using to coordinate his entire operation for the last 24 hours, at the encrypted line through which every location, every plan, every asset deployment had been transmitted. He set the phone down on the console with a precision and a quietness that was more alarming than anything he could have said. We're going dark, he said. All of us. Now. He looked at Reyes. Can you reach the Harborview team without... No, Reyes said. Not through any channel he doesn't have access to. The car was quiet for 4 seconds. Then we go ourselves, Dante said. Whatever we have in this vehicle. Ivy counted the people in the car. Dante, Reyes, Tran, Sable, the driver, herself. 6 people. Against a professional crew with a chemical agent and a 3-hour head start on the timeline, and a man inside Dante's organization who had been feeding their movements to the people they were trying to stop. I can get us in, Ivy said. I know that building better than anyone alive. I designed it. I know every access point, every corridor, every system junction. She paused. Including the ventilation bypass, including how to shut it. Everyone looked at her. That bypass runs through a manual damper in the sub-basement, she said. It was a safety specification. I required it because the system was oversized and I needed a mechanical shutoff that couldn't be bypassed electronically. Standard practice for oversized HVAC in sealed environments. She paused. I specified it, which means only I know exactly where it is and how it functions. It's not on any permit documentation because it was a field modification I made during construction walkthrough. She paused again. Which means it is also not in my cloud archive. Sable was looking at her with an expression that had shifted entirely. Garrity doesn't know about it, Tran said slowly. Strand doesn't know about it, Sable confirmed. The crew going in tonight doesn't know about it, Dante said. No, Ivy said. They think the ventilation system is a weapon. They don't know it has a manual off switch that only I can find. The car moved through Seattle's gray afternoon, and Ivy sat in the back seat of a vehicle carrying 6 people with inadequate resources and a compromised communication network, heading toward a building she had designed with her own hands that had been used against her, that was about to be destroyed unless she went back inside it. She thought, this is what it costs to matter. She thought, this is what he took from me, and this is how I take it back. She thought, if I go into that building tonight, I am not the same person who crouched behind a bathroom door 16 hours ago, and I am never going back to being her whatever happens next. She said, I need to know one more thing. Name it, Dante said. Garrity, she said. When this is over, what happens to him? Dante looked at her in the rearview mirror. His eyes were steady. What do you want to happen? I want him to answer for it in a room where the record is permanent, she said. Not in an alley, not quietly. In a federal proceeding, on the record, where every person he helped protect gets named. A pause. That's what I want too, Dante said. As it happens. Then we need those servers, she said. Intact. Yes. Then drive faster, she said. The city blurred past the window, and somewhere in the Harbor View building, the ventilation system was waiting, her design, her damper, her specifications. And the clock was moving, and Ivy Calloway, who had spent 3 years being carefully made invisible, was about to walk back into the most dangerous thing she'd ever built and use it to burn down the people who had used it against her. The driver pushed the SUV through a yellow light at 4th and Columbia, and Ivy gripped the door handle and did not look away from the road ahead. Tran was already pulling the Harbor View schematics on the isolated device, the copies she'd taken from Ivy's archive before Garrity accessed it, before the window closed. She turned the screen toward Ivy without being asked. Sub-basement access, Ivy said, tracing the route with one finger. Service elevator on the north face. There's a utility corridor that runs parallel to the main mechanical room. It's not on the permit drawings because I added it during the walkthrough as a maintenance access lane. 12 feet long, terminates at the damper housing. She looked up. We go in through the loading entrance on the east side. I still have the key code. Marcus never changed the contractor codes because he didn't know I had them. He didn't know a lot of things, Sable said quietly. No, Ivy said. He didn't. Dante turned in his seat and looked at her fully for the first time since the car started moving. The afternoon light caught the gray at his temple and the tiredness around his eyes, and the thing underneath both of those that she'd been trying to name since 7 that morning and still couldn't precisely. Once you close that damper, he said, they'll know the system has been interrupted. They'll move to manual destruction. We'll have minutes. I know, she said. It'll be loud. I know. And dangerous. Dante. She held his gaze. I designed that building. I know every wall, every corridor, every room that shouldn't exist but does. I know where they'll go when the damper closes, and I know how to stay ahead of them. She paused. Trust me the same way you asked me to trust you this morning. He looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he faced forward. Reyes, he said, when we hit Harbor View, you take the loading entrance. I take the north face. Tran and Sable stay with the vehicle and maintain whatever communication we can establish through the isolated device. He paused. Calloway goes to the sub-basement. With who? Reyes said. With me. he said. Nobody argued. The building appeared through the rain-streaked windshield, glass and steel and concrete rising against a sky going dark at the edges, the skyline of Seattle closing around it like a fist, and inside it somewhere, in a room that shouldn't exist, servers were running that contained the full recorded architecture of a criminal empire that had used Ivy Calloway's hands to build its walls. She was going to walk back in. She was going to close the damper. And whatever came through that door afterward, she was ready. The loading entrance was exactly where she'd specified it. That was the thing about buildings. They didn't lie. They didn't revise their positions based on what was convenient. A door placed at 22 feet from the northeast corner stayed at 22 feet from the northeast corner, regardless of what happened inside it, regardless of who used it and for what, regardless of the rain that was now coming down hard enough to turn the Harbor View parking structure into a shallow river moving toward the drain grates she had also specified. Ivy punched the contractor code into the keypad. 8 digits. Her thumb found them without looking. Muscle memory from 47 construction walkthroughs over 8 months of renovation work. The kind of repetition that embeds itself below conscious recall. The lock disengaged. Dante put his hand flat against the door, held it, looked at her. 1 second. The question without words. Are you ready? She pushed past him and went in. The loading corridor was dark except for the emergency strip lighting along the floor. The same specification she'd used in 3 other commercial properties. Low wattage LED at baseboard level, enough to navigate by, not enough to be visible from outside. The air smelled like concrete and the specific electrical smell of running server hardware, which was stronger than she'd expected, which meant the vault below them was generating significant heat despite the climate control. They were running at capacity. Dante came in behind her. Let the door close. Pressed himself to the wall and scanned the corridor in both directions with the practiced efficiency of someone whose survival had depended on that assessment reflex for long enough that it had become structural. Clear, he said quietly. Service elevator is 60 feet north, she said. But we don't take it. The mechanical noise will carry. She was already moving. There's a utility stair behind the electrical panel housing. It's not marked because I added it during walkthrough as a secondary egress for the mechanical room. Follow me exactly. He followed. She found the panel housing by touch as much as sight. A recessed section of wall, slightly cooler than the surrounding concrete, with a gap at the baseboard that her fingers recognized before her eyes confirmed it. She pressed the right side of the panel, felt the magnetic catch release, and the section swung inward on its hinges. Behind it, a stairwell barely wide enough for one person, dropping 12 feet to the sub-basement level, lit by a single emergency light at the bottom. She went down first. The sub-basement hit her like a physical thing. The heat, the noise, the relentless mechanical breathing of the HVAC system running at full capacity. The server vault was behind the false wall to her left, and even through 18 inches of reinforced concrete, she could hear the specific frequency of active hardware. Dozens of drives, running continuously. 14 months of recorded surveillance, every conversation, every face, every order given in the house on the hill where she'd spent 3 years being systematically reduced. She turned right, away from the vault, toward the utility corridor. Dante grabbed her arm. She stopped, looked at him. He pointed up. She listened. Above them, 2 floors up through concrete and steel, the sound of boots. Multiple sets. Moving with purpose, not stealth, which meant they were past the point of concealment and into execution. They moved early, she said. Yes. How early? He checked his watch. 40 minutes. She did the math automatically, the same way she calculated load tolerances and material quantities. 40 minutes early meant someone had warned them. Someone had known their timeline. Someone had access to communications that should have been isolated. The device, she said. Trans-isolated device. Garrity had access to the procurement records for every piece of hardware in the organization. He knew what isolated meant to us, Dante said. He knew which device we'd use. So he's been reading everything Tran pulled since we went dark. Yes, she absorbed that, filed it, moved. The utility corridor was exactly where she'd built it. 12 feet of unlit concrete terminating at a housing unit the size of a residential water heater, painted the same gray as the walls, completely unremarkable unless you knew it was there. She found it in the dark by counting her steps from the stairwell entrance. 11 feet. 12. Her hands found the housing cover. The damper mechanism was inside. A manual wheel valve, 8 inches in diameter, requiring a clockwise rotation of approximately 270 degrees to achieve full closure. She'd specified steel construction with a non-corrosive coating because the environment was moisture-adjacent and she needed it to function reliably without maintenance. It had never been maintained. It had never been touched. She gripped the wheel, applied rotational pressure. It didn't move. She applied more. Her palms against the steel, shoulders engaged, the full geometry of her body weight behind it. 2 years of non-use in a high-humidity sub-basement had seized the mechanism with the specific stubbornness of metal that had settled into its position and decided to stay there. "Dante," she said. He was beside her in 2 steps, his hands covering hers on the wheel, and she felt the difference immediately. Not just the added force, but the redistribution of it, the way his body aligned behind the effort, and the wheel moved a fraction, and then another fraction, and then with a sound like a joint being cracked under pressure, it broke free and began to turn. 60 degrees, 90. Above them, the HVAC frequency changed, a shift in pitch, a reduction in airflow that would register immediately on any monitoring system the crew upstairs had brought with them. "They'll know," she said. "Keep turning," he said. 180 degrees, 240. The pitch dropped further. The heat in the sub-basement began to climb almost immediately as the cooling airflow reduced. The servers in the vault beyond the wall were going to start thermal throttling within minutes. 270. Full closure. The mechanical breathing stopped. The sub-basement went quiet except for the ambient hum of the server hardware and the sound of both of them breathing hard from the effort. 3 seconds of quiet. Then above them, shouting. Not words she could make out through the concrete, just the cadence of alarm, of a plan encountering an obstacle, of professionals recalibrating under pressure. Then running. "They're coming down," Dante said. "I know." She was already moving back toward the stairwell. The main staircase from the ground floor connects to the sub-basement mechanical room. They'll hit that door in about 90 seconds. "Which door?" "The one at the far end of this corridor." "How far is the far end?" 40 feet. "And the door we came through?" 20 feet behind us. She stopped. Looked at the corridor, looked at him. "We can't go back up the utility stair. They'll have people on every exit by now." She ran the building layout in her mind. The full schematic, every room, every passage, every specification she'd made, and every modification she hadn't. "There's one more option. When I designed the utility corridor, I included a lateral access point to the main mechanical room. I built it as a service pass-through for equipment installation. It's behind the second section of wall paneling on the right side." "How far?" 15 feet. "And from the mechanical room?" "There's a freight passage to the north loading dock. Different from the entrance we used. It exits on the street side face of the building." "That's our exit?" "That's our exit," she confirmed. "But..." The door at the far end of the corridor opened. Light flooded in. Silhouettes. 3 of them, moving fast, with the low-profile body language of people carrying equipment they didn't want to announce. She and Dante flattened against the wall instinctively. The utility corridor was dark. The incoming light was behind the approaching figures, and for approximately 4 seconds, they were invisible against the concrete. 4 seconds. She found the wall panel by touch, the second section. Her fingers ran the seam, found the lip, pulled. It moved. 6 inches? 8? Enough. She went through sideways, and Dante came through behind her, and she pulled the panel back into place, and they stood in the mechanical room in the dark, with the sound of footsteps passing on the other side of the wall, 6 inches from their backs. She didn't breathe. Dante's hand found her shoulder, steadying. She wasn't sure if it was for her or for him. She left it there. The footsteps moved past. Continued. She heard one of them say something. A fragment, partially muffled. "Damper's been manually closed, someone was." And then the rest was distance and concrete and gone. She breathed. "Freight passage," Dante said against her ear. Barely sound. She turned and navigated the mechanical room by memory. Around the primary air handling units. past the pump housing, to the north wall where the freight passage door was set into the concrete with a push-bar exit mechanism she'd specified for emergency egress. She hit the bar. The door opened into a passage that smelled like outdoor air and wet asphalt, the freight tunnel connecting to the north loading dock, exactly as she'd built it. They moved through it fast. 30 feet, 50. The dock door at the end was unlocked. Loading docks with active permits were required to maintain unlocked egress during business hours, a code requirement she'd verified personally during the permit process. Cold air. Rain. The north face of the building, street side, exposed. And standing 10 feet away, with a phone to his ear and a black SUV behind him, and an expression that confirmed every suspicion the afternoon had assembled, was Garrity. He saw them at the same moment they saw him. The phone came down slowly. His face arranged itself into something that wasn't quite surprise. He'd known they were in the building, he'd been positioned here because he'd calculated the exit, but it wasn't quite composure either. It was the face of a man who'd spent 14 months managing the distance between himself and consequence and was now standing inside it. "Dante," he said, as if they'd run into each other somewhere unremarkable, as if 8 years and an operational betrayal could be navigated with a first name and the right tone. Dante looked at him. The rain was soaking both of them now, and Dante didn't seem to notice it, which was more frightening than any expression he could have made. "How long were you talking to them?" Dante said. "It's more complicated than—" "How long, Garrity?" A pause. The rain filled it. 14 months, Garrity said. He didn't look away. She gave him that. The willingness to hold the gaze while saying it. "But not how you think. I wasn't—" He stopped. Restarted. "I reached out to the federal unit because the syndicate was moving into territory that was going to collapse everything. Not just your operation. Everything. I was trying to accelerate the case, get it to indictment before the syndicate embedded itself past the point of removal." "You were managing it," Dante said. "I was trying to control the damage. By feeding them our locations, our safe houses. The location we put her in." His voice hadn't risen. "She could have been killed, Garrity." "I know." Something in Garrity's face moved. Genuine, or close enough that the difference stopped mattering. "I know that. I didn't know they'd move on the safe house that fast. I gave the location to my federal contact, not to Marcus's people. Someone in the federal unit? Someone in the federal unit was also compromised," Dante said, "which you would have known if you'd told me what you were doing instead of operating independently for 14 months inside my organization." The word independently landed like a closed door. Garrity looked at Ivy. "I put the photograph in the file," he said. She stared at him. "The photograph of Sable Voss," he said. "I put it there. I needed you to find her. I needed Dante to know she was back in Seattle and that she had the drive, but I couldn't surface it directly without admitting you already knew she was here," Ivy said. "Yes." "You've been in contact with Sable Voss." "Since Vancouver," he said. "She came to me first, before she came to you. She wanted a back channel into the federal case, and I was the only person she knew who had access." He looked at Dante. "She trusts you. She came back to Seattle because she trusts you. But she needed to know the federal case was real and moving before she'd hand over the drive. I gave her that confirmation." He paused. "Everything I've done for 14 months, every piece of information I passed, every timeline I adjusted, was pointed at the same outcome. Getting those servers to federal custody intact. Getting the syndicate on record in a proceeding that can't be suppressed. Through means that got people killed," Dante said. "Through means that kept more people from getting killed," Garrity said. "I know how that sounds. I know what it cost. I'm standing here telling you anyway because I'm done managing the distance." He looked between them. "The crew inside has realized the damper is closed manually. They're going to switch to physical destruction of the hardware. They have tools for it. It'll take longer, but it'll work. You have maybe 12 minutes before those servers are gone." "How do you know 12 minutes?" Ivy said. "Because I've seen the operational plan," he said. "I've been reading their communications for 6 weeks." Dante looked at him for a long moment. "You have their communications," Dante said. "Everything. Encrypted copies, isolated storage. It was my exit strategy, evidence of their operation that I could trade for my own position in whatever comes next. He reached into his jacket, slowly, demonstratively slowly, making sure the deliberateness registered, and produced a drive that was identical in size and appearance to the one Sable had handed over. This is everything I have. 6 weeks of their internal communications, names, timelines, the Harborview destruction order, Strand's full instruction chain. He held it out. Neither of them moved toward it. Dante, Garrity said. And the 8 years were in it. Not as manipulation, Ivy thought, but simply as weight. The weight of a duration that didn't disappear just because it had been compromised. I know what I did. I know what it cost. But right now there's a crew 12 minutes away from destroying the only complete record of what that syndicate has done, and I'm the only person standing here who knows their exit plan. Ivy looked at Dante. Dante looked at Garrity. The rain came down between them and didn't care about any of it. Tell me the exit plan, Dante said. Garrity told him. It took 90 seconds. Ivy listened and mapped it against the building schematic in her mind. The routes, the timing, the 2-vehicle extraction positioned on the south face, the contingency if the hardware destruction took longer than planned. When Garrity finished, Dante took the drive from his outstretched hand. You're going to wait here, Dante said. When this is done, you're going to sit across from a federal prosecutor and you're going to tell them everything you told me in whatever form they require for as long as it takes. You understand? Yes, Garrity said. And then whatever comes after that is what comes after that. Yes, Garrity said again. And he meant it. She could see that he meant it, in the specific way that people mean things when they've finished carrying them. Dante looked at Ivy. 9 minutes. I know a faster route, she said. Through the east mechanical access. It bypasses the main corridor and comes up behind the vault room. Show me. She went back through the freight passage, back into the building, back into the dark and the heat and the sound of her own design breathing around her and Dante at her back, and somewhere above them a crew with 11 minutes left on their timeline and no idea that the woman who had built this place was moving through its bones toward them. The east mechanical access was a ladder shaft, not a stair, an actual service ladder set into the wall, running from sub-basement to the second-floor mechanical mezzanine in a continuous vertical line. She'd specified it for equipment installation and had forgotten it existed until this moment, when she needed it. She went up first. The rungs were steel, cold. Her hands gripped them, and she climbed, counting floors by the change in ambient temperature and the shift in the mechanical sounds around her. And her arms burned from the wheel effort in the sub-basement, and she climbed anyway because there was no version of this where she stopped. First floor. She kept climbing. Second floor mezzanine. She stopped. Pressed her back against the ladder housing and listened. Voices. Close. The flat professional exchanges of people working under time pressure, terse directives, acknowledgments, the specific verbal economy of a team that had trained together and was now executing. She counted 2 voices, maybe 3. She looked down the ladder shaft at Dante, 2 rungs below her, held up 3 fingers. A question mark. He shook his head slightly, held up 2. 2. She looked at the access hatch above her shoulder. The mezzanine opened onto a catwalk running above the second-floor interior space, and from the catwalk there was a drop-down access to the room she needed. Not the vault, but the primary electrical junction for the building's network infrastructure. The vault ran on an independent power supply, but the network uplink, the satellite relay, the continuous transmission pipeline, ran through the primary junction. If she could reach it, she could trigger an emergency network broadcast, not to the sealed servers, to the satellite relay itself, which had its own transmission buffer. 14 months of data, continuously uploading. The buffer stored the last 72 hours of data as redundancy in case of connection interruption. 72 hours of surveillance footage from Marcus Wren's house transmitted to a satellite relay that she could access through the electrical junction, broadcast to. She needed a receiving address. She looked down at Dante, made a gesture she wasn't sure he'd understand, a square shape with her fingers, like a screen, then pointed up. Then made a transmission gesture, hand moving outward like something being sent. He looked at her, understood something, not all of it, reached into his jacket and produced the encrypted handset, useless for calls, potentially compromised, but it had one function Garrity couldn't have anticipated, a direct satellite address, hard-coded into the hardware during manufacture, that bypassed all software and connected to the manufacturer's emergency relay. He'd mentioned it to Tran 3 weeks ago as a technical footnote, not in any communication Garrity had access to. She looked at the handset, looked at him. He climbed up beside her on the ladder. Barely room for both of them. And she took the handset and she opened the emergency relay function, which required a 6-digit manufacturer code she didn't have, and she looked at the keypad and she thought about the 72 hours of data waiting in a buffer above her head, and she typed the only 6-digit code she could think of. The contractor keypad code she'd used at the loading entrance, the one Marcus had never changed, the one she'd used 40 times during construction, and that was therefore in the building's original documentation under her professional stamp. The relay connected. She looked at Dante. He looked at her. She went up through the hatch. The catwalk was narrow, set 18 inches of steel grating above a 2-story drop to the ground floor, running the length of the building's interior spine. She didn't look down. She moved along it toward the electrical junction housing at the far end, and she was halfway there when one of the crew below looked up. She heard the shout before she processed it, moved before she finished processing the shout. The junction housing was 20 feet away, and she covered it in seconds that didn't feel like seconds, pulled the housing panel, found the network trunk line by color, orange, the specification she'd used across all her commercial projects as a personal system, and jammed the handset connector into the auxiliary port. The transmission buffer began uploading to the satellite relay. Behind her, on the catwalk, she heard boots. She turned. A man she didn't recognize was coming toward her from the far end of the catwalk. He'd come up through a different access, had been on the mezzanine already when she arrived, and he was moving fast with the flat expression of someone who'd been given a simple directive and was going to execute it. She had nowhere to go. The housing was at her back. The drop was below her. The catwalk extended in both directions, and he was between her and the hatch she'd come through. She gripped the housing panel. He was 10 feet away when Dante came up through the hatch behind him. What happened next lasted approximately 4 seconds and was not clean or cinematic. It was 2 people in a narrow space with gravity below them and the specific ugly efficiency of a physical confrontation where there's no room for anything except the most direct resolution. Dante was behind the man turned, and the 4 seconds resolved with the man's back against the catwalk railing and Dante's forearm across his chest, and the railing taking their combined weight with a sound that made Ivy's engineering instinct fire an alert she couldn't act on. The man went down. Not over the railing, down onto the catwalk grating, controlled, Dante's knee on the back of his legs. Dante looked up at her, blood on his lip, eyes completely level. "How long does it need?" he said. She checked the handset, the upload bar. 3 more minutes. "We don't have 3 minutes." From below them, through the building's floor, she heard something she recognized from the schematic, the sound of the freight elevator engaging. The crew's extraction, triggered by the network activity alert the upload would have generated. They were leaving, without finishing the job, which meant they'd decided the evidence being broadcast was worse than the evidence being destroyed on site, that the transmission was already reaching the satellite relay, and they'd calculated the math and chosen to run rather than fight for a building that was already compromised. She looked at the upload bar, 60%, 70. Dante stood up, looked over the catwalk railing at the ground floor below them, came to stand beside her at the junction housing, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him in the cold building air. "It's working," she said. "Yes," he said. "They're running." "Yes, 80%. From somewhere below and to the south, outside the building, street side, she heard vehicles moving, fast. The extraction. 2 vehicles, as Garrity had described. 90. She thought about Marcus Wren, about the house on the hill, about 14 months of recorded meetings in the East Wing study, every handshake and every order and every name spoken in what he'd believed was the security of a home he controlled completely. She thought about what it was going to feel like when every person in those recordings heard their own voices played back to them in a federal proceeding. 95. Dante's hand was on the railing beside hers, not touching, close. She said, "When this uploads—" "I know," he said. "Everything changes." "Everything already changed," he said. "2 nights ago. Wrong number." She looked at him. He was looking at the upload bar. 100%. The handset chimed once, a single clean tone that echoed in the empty building like something settling into place. And the transmission completed, and 72 hours of evidence from the house on the hill where Ivy Calloway had spent 3 years being carefully made small was now in the hands of a satellite relay that would route it to the Federal Financial Crimes Unit's emergency evidence intake within the next 4 minutes, time-stamped and authenticated and impossible to suppress. Below them, the building was empty and quiet. Above them, the Seattle sky was doing what it always did. She stood on the catwalk with the handset in her hand and the completed upload bar on the screen and the sound of her own breathing in the dark. And she heard, faint, from outside, from the street, from the city that hadn't known any of this was happening, the first distant sound of sirens beginning to build. Someone had called it in. Garrity, she thought. Standing in the rain at the north loading dock with his extraction drive and his 14 months of wait, making the call that was the only version of himself he had left. Dante looked at her. "We need to be gone before—" "I know," she said. But she stood there one more second, just one, looking at the building around her, the walls she'd designed, the specifications she'd signed, the spaces that had been turned against her and that she had now turned back. And she let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened and what it meant and what it was going to cost to untangle. And then she set it down. Not permanently, but for now. "Okay," she said, and they moved. The sirens were closer by the time they reached the street. Ivy came out of the north loading dock into rain that hit her face like a correction. Cold, immediate, indifferent to everything that had happened in the last 4 hours. She stopped for 1 second on the wet concrete and breathed it in. The oxygen felt different outside, larger. She hadn't noticed how compressed the air inside the building had become until she was no longer in it. Garrity was where they'd left him, standing at the edge of the loading dock overhang with his collar up and his hands at his sides, and the particular stillness of a man who had made his last calculation and was waiting for the result. He looked at Dante when they came out, then at Ivy, then back at Dante. "It transmitted," Dante said. Garrity closed his eyes. Just for a second. When he opened them, they were the same, but something behind them had shifted. A weight redistributed, not lifted, just moved to a different position where it could be carried differently. "All of it?" he said. 72 hours, Ivy said. "The relay buffer. Everything recorded in that house in the last 3 days, which means every meeting Marcus held in the week before he understood I was gone and started managing his exposure." She paused. "He would have been making calls, consolidating. Everyone he contacted in those 72 hours is now on federal record." Garrity nodded slowly. "He'll have lawyers on it within the hour." "Let him," Dante said. "The transmission is authenticated, satellite time-stamped. The intake team at the Financial Crimes Unit will have it flagged as priority evidence the moment it arrives, because I had Tran send them an advisory from an isolated line 20 minutes ago." Garrity looked at him. "You trusted Tran." "I trust Tran," Dante said, simply, without elaboration. The contrast was its own statement. The sirens resolved into visible light, 2 federal vehicles coming around the south face of the Harbor View building, moving without the wild urgency of emergency response and with the controlled pace of an operation arriving on a timeline they'd already established, not responding to a call, executing a plan. "They were already moving," Ivy said. "The advisory Tran sent included the Harbor View address and the destruction timeline," Dante said. "They've been repositioning for 40 minutes. She watched the vehicles. Watched the agents emerge, 4 of them, in the dark jackets and careful body language of people who'd been briefed thoroughly and were now doing what they'd rehearsed. They moved to the building's primary entrance without looking in Dante and Ivy's direction, which meant either they hadn't seen them or they'd been instructed not to see them, and she couldn't tell which and found she wasn't particularly focused on finding out. A 5th agent came around the vehicle's far side, older, in a coat rather than tactical gear, With a phone pressed to his ear and the ground-eating walk of someone accustomed to arriving at scenes and immediately becoming their organizational center. He looked directly at Dante. Dante looked back. Some kind of recognition passed between them. Not warmth, not hostility, something older and more complicated than either. The agent ended his call, walked toward them, stopped 6 feet away. "Castellano," he said. "Whitmore," Dante said. Ivy filed the name. Whitmore. Federal, clearly. Senior. The way he carried his jurisdiction suggested he'd been carrying it for a long time and had stopped needing to announce it. "The transmission came in 11 minutes ago," Whitmore said. "Our intake team is already processing the authentication." He looked at Ivy. "You're Calloway." "Yes," she said. "You accessed the relay." "Yes." He studied her for a moment with the specific quality of someone who has reviewed a file on a person and is now calibrating the difference between the file and the person standing in front of them. Whatever adjustment he made it quickly and moved on. "We've been building this case for 14 months, he said. "We have a protected witness, financial records, and now this transmission. With the drive Sable Voss carried out of Vancouver and the communications archive, your colleague—" He glanced at Garrity without the word colleague becoming ironic, which took some professional discipline. "Compiled over 6 weeks, we have enough to move on 12 individuals simultaneously, including Marcus Wren." "When?" Dante said. 72 hours, Whitmore said. "We need the transmission authenticated through our system, the drive verified, and a judge briefed for the warrants. 72 hours from now, every person named in that evidence is in custody or running, and running tells us something too." Ivy thought about Marcus in the house on the hill, about the East Wing office she'd never entered, and the surveillance system he'd built, and the 3 years he'd spent positioning her as his professional liability and his personal leverage and his contingency plan for every scenario except this one. She thought about what he was doing right now, whether he knew yet, whether the crew's failure to complete the Harbor View destruction had reached him and what he'd done when it did. "He'll move the files in the East Wing office," she said. "If he knows the transmission happened, he'll know the archive is compromised. He'll try to destroy whatever physical records he has." "We have eyes on the house," Whitmore said. "He hasn't left. As of 20 minutes ago, he was on the phone in the study. We have ambient audio from a source we placed 8 weeks ago." He paused. "He doesn't know about the transmission yet. He knows the Harbor View operation failed. He doesn't know why." 8 weeks, Dante said. "You had a source inside his house 8 weeks ago." "Yes." "Who?" Whitmore looked at him. A measured pause. "That's not something I'm going to share." "Sable Voss," Ivy said. Whitmore's expression didn't change, which was its own confirmation. "She played 3 boards simultaneously," Dante said. Not angry, analytical, absorbing the shape of it. "Your investigation, Marcus's inner circle through Strand, and my organization through Garrity." "She played the only board that mattered," Whitmore said. "The one where the evidence ends up intact and the people responsible end up in a courtroom." He looked between them. "She took significant personal risk to do it. I'd ask you to keep that in mind." "Where is she now?" Dante said. "Safe," Whitmore said. And in his voice was the same finality that Reyes had used on Ivy's first night, the same answer that is not an answer, and Dante received it the same way Ivy had received it, with the recognition that pressing it would cost more than it returned. Whitmore turned back toward the building. The 4 agents had established a perimeter and were waiting. He took 3 steps, then stopped. "Calloway," he said without turning, "your professional documentation, the archive you maintained independently, the change orders, the photographic records, the specifications. We're going to need all of it for the prosecution file." He paused. "You'll be listed as a cooperating witness, not a subject. That determination was made 6 weeks ago when we reviewed the paper trail and established that the modifications attributed to your professional stamp were made either without your knowledge or under conditions that negated informed consent." He paused again. "You were set up. The record will say so." She stood in the rain and let that arrive. "The record will say so. 3 years of carefully constructed professional liability, dismantled in a sentence by a man in a federal coat who said it the way he said everything, efficiently, without decoration, because the truth didn't need any. "Thank you," she said. He walked away. Garrity stepped forward, looked at Dante. "I'll go involuntarily," he said. "Tonight. I'll request Whitmore's unit specifically. I have—" He stopped, revised. "I have a lot to tell them. The 6 weeks of communications, my own involvement, all of it." He looked down at the drive in his hand. "I know what this costs. I'm not asking for anything." Dante looked at him for a long moment. 8 years lived between them in that look. 8 years of a thing that had been something and was now something different. And the difference didn't erase the 8 years. It just meant they had to be carried differently going forward. "Go," Dante said. "Tonight. Don't make them come find you." "I won't," Garrity said. He walked away too, toward the federal vehicles. A figure in the rain, smaller with distance, carrying a drive in 8 years and the particular dignity of someone who had finally stopped managing the distance between themselves and what they'd done. Ivy watched him go. Dante stood beside her. The rain was lighter now, she realized. Not stopped, but shifted to something quieter, the specific Seattle transition from downpour to persistence. "Reyes," she said. "I know," he said. "You need to talk to her." "I know." "She wasn't the source," Ivy said. "The gesture at the table? When she put her hand down, when you had everyone turn over their phones. She was scared, not guilty. People who are guilty don't get scared the same way." He was quiet for a moment. "You noticed that?" "I notice things." "Yes," he said. "You do." He looked at the side of her face, the bruise that was still there, yellowing at the edges, the split lip that had scabbed over sometime in the last several hours without her noticing when. "You need a doctor." "I needed a doctor 2 days ago," she said. "I'll manage." "Ivy." She looked at him. "I'm going to have someone take you somewhere tonight that has nothing to do with my organization," he said. "A hotel. Clean reservation under a name that isn't yours and isn't mine. You sleep. In the morning, there will be an attorney, not mine, independent, someone who handles federal witness situations, who will walk you through every aspect of what comes next." He paused. "The agreement we made. It stands. When this closes, you walk, clean." She looked at him steadily. "I know it stands," she said. "I believed you when you said it." He held her gaze. Something moved in his expression that she'd seen traces of across the last 48 hours, but never quite this directly. Not the almost smile, not the managerial calm, something underneath both of those. Something that was simply him, unarchitected, in the rain. "That surprises you," she said. "A little," he admitted. "You're not used to being believed without leverage." "No," he said. "I'm not." She looked away. At the building. At the federal agents now inside it, moving through corridors she had built, following routes she could have narrated from memory. At the city beyond it, going about its midnight, the restaurants still lit, the bars still open, the traffic still moving on the bridge, all of it indifferent and continuous, and exactly as it had always been. "I'm going to call my sister," she said, "before anything else. I need her to know I'm alive." "Of course," he said. She pulled her phone, found Nora's name, the right name, the actual name, no wrong digits, and pressed it, and stood in the rain outside a building she had designed and survived and used as a weapon, and listened to it ring. Nora answered on the second ring, said her name immediately with the specific quality of fear that had been held in suspension and was now releasing all at once. Ivy said, "I'm okay. I'm outside. She stopped, started again. "I'm okay, Nora. I need you to hear that first." She walked away from Dante while she talked. Not far, 20 feet, 30, but enough to have the conversation without witness. She talked for 8 minutes. She didn't explain everything because everything was too large for a phone call in a parking structure in the rain at midnight. She explained enough. Nora cried for the last 3 minutes of the call and Ivy let her, and she didn't tell her not to because the crying was the appropriate response. and pretending otherwise would have been its own kind of cruelty. When she hung up, she stood alone for a moment, the rain on her shoulders, the cold air, the distant sound of the federal operation proceeding inside the building, with the organized patience of institutional machinery moving toward an outcome that had been months in the making. She thought about 3 years, about what they had actually cost, not the abstract cost, not the narrative version, but the specific inventory, the work she hadn't done, the spaces she hadn't designed, the version of herself she'd spent so much energy suppressing that she'd half forgotten it existed, the professional confidence that had been so carefully, systematically undermined that she'd begun to believe the undermining was simply accurate assessment. The sister she hadn't called because calling Nora would have required admitting things she hadn't been ready to admit. She thought about the bathroom with the marble floors, about how small it was for a $2.4 million house, about the voice on the other end of a wrong number that had asked, with complete directness, "Where are you?" And how that question, asked by a stranger, had been the first time in 3 years that anyone had asked it and meant "tell me so I can help you" rather than "tell me so I know where you are." She turned and walked back to where Dante was standing. He was on the phone now. A brief call, quiet, that ended before she reached him. He put it away. "Reyes," he said. "I talked to her." "Good. You were right. She wasn't the source." He paused. "She was angry, reasonably." "Yes," Ivy said. "She would be." "She said—" He stopped, almost smiled. "She said she'd known about the inside source for 3 weeks and hadn't surfaced it because she didn't have evidence and she wasn't going to accuse someone on instinct, that it wasn't the way she operated." He looked at the middle distance. She was protecting the organization's integrity by not speaking. He paused. "And I sat her down and took her phone and looked at her like you couldn't trust her," Ivy said. "Yes." "You'll fix it," she said. "I don't know that everything gets fixed," he said. "No," she agreed. "Not everything. But some things do." He looked at her. The rain had plastered his hair slightly, the gray at the temple more visible when wet, and he looked tired in the way he'd looked tired from the first morning. Deeply, structurally, the tiredness of someone who had been running an enormous operation for a very long time without allowing for the cost of it. She said, "What happens to your organization now?" "Restructuring," he said. "The federal case is going to create pressure on several operational areas. Some of what I've been running will need to be wound down, some of it redirected." He was matter-of-fact about it. "I've been thinking about it for longer than this week." "The community redevelopment projects," she said. She'd heard it referenced, something Tran had mentioned in passing, some legitimate arm of his holdings that had apparently been expanding quietly for the past 2 years. He looked at her. "You heard about those." "Tran talks when she's focused on something else," Ivy said. "She mentioned 3 properties in the Rainier Valley that you've been developing as affordable commercial space, and a building rehabilitation project in the Central District." She paused. "Those are real." "Yes," he said. "They're real." She looked at him, at the man who had built an empire on strategic patience and the willingness to make decisions that other men couldn't make without flinching, and who was standing in a parking structure in the rain, telling her that some of what he'd built was already becoming something different, not because he'd been caught, but because he'd decided to. She wasn't naive about what he was. She wasn't constructing a version of him that fit a cleaner story, but she was also, she realized, no longer in the habit of ignoring what was actually in front of her in favor of what she'd been told to see. "I'll need studio space," she said, "when this is done. The professional archive is going to be tied up in federal proceedings for a while, but the work itself, the actual design work, I can start again. I know what I'm doing. I've always known what I was doing." She paused. "I just spent 3 years being told I needed permission to do it." "You don't need permission," he said. "I know that now," she said. "I knew it before. I just forgot." A silence between them, not uncomfortable. It had the quality of a silence that had been earned, that was resting after effort, that didn't need to be filled. "The Rainier Valley properties," he said finally. "One of them needs an interior fit-out, commercial units, ground floor, the kind of space that could work for a design studio." He said it the way he said most things, without inflection, without pressure, simply placing the information in the air between them and leaving it there. She looked at him. "I'm not doing you a favor," he said. "The space needs someone who knows what they're doing. You know what you're doing." "I'm also about to be a federal witness in a major criminal prosecution," she said. "The space will still need fit-out after that," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city continued its ordinary business, indifferent and continuous, and somewhere in the hill above them, a man who had spent 3 years systematically dismantling her was about to discover that the architecture he'd built his empire on had been used to transmit his own crimes to the people positioned to end him. "Show me the space," she said. "When this is over, I'll look at it and tell you what I think." "That's all I'm asking," he said. She nodded. They stood there a moment longer, two people in the rain outside a building that would spend the next several months as a federal evidence site, having arrived at something that wasn't quite resolution and wasn't quite beginning, but was the specific territory between them where both things were possible. Then Dante's phone lit up. He looked at it. His face changed. Not dramatically, just the shift of someone receiving information that confirms what they'd expected and still carries weight. "Marcus Wren just left the house," he said. "Federal surveillance followed. He's driving toward the airport." Ivy looked at him. "He knows," she said. "Yes." "He found out about the transmission." "Someone told him," Dante said, "which means there's a fourth board we didn't know Sable was playing, or there's a connection inside Whitmore's unit we haven't identified, or—" He stopped. His phone lit up again. A text this time. He read it. His expression completed a shift she hadn't seen before. Something releasing, something that had been held at tension for a long time, finally reaching the point where the tension was no longer necessary. He turned the phone so she could see. The text was from a number she didn't recognize. 4 words and a period. He won't reach the gate. "Sable," Ivy said. "Sable," Dante confirmed. She thought about the woman in the photograph, standing outside the east wing of the house at night, looking directly at the camera with the calm expression of someone who knew they were being photographed and had chosen to stand still for it, playing 3 boards simultaneously, managing the distance between every faction with the specific skill of someone who had learned early that the safest position in any conflict was the one nobody thought to account for. Marcus Wren did not reach the gate. They learned the details over the following hour, in pieces, through Whitmore's unit and through the texts that came in on Dante's phone with the irregular cadence of a situation resolving in real time. He had been stopped at the departures level by 2 federal agents who had been waiting, not responding to surveillance alert, but waiting, already positioned, already briefed. The arrest had been quiet, efficient, the kind of arrest that happens when the people making it have been ready to make it for a long time, and have simply been waiting for the authorization to catch up to the evidence. He had said nothing. That detail arrived last, relayed through Whitmore directly. Marcus Wren had been placed in custody without resistance, without statement, without any of the performance that characterized every other interaction she'd ever witnessed from him. He had simply gone quiet, the way things go quiet when they've run out of moves. She received the information standing in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the Harbor View building, where Dante had brought her out of the rain, and where they'd been sitting for 40 minutes, with cups neither of them had finished. The shop was nearly empty at this hour, a barista restocking behind the counter, one other customer at a corner table with headphones and a laptop, and no awareness of anything happening beyond the radius of his screen. Ordinary, completely ordinary. The fluorescent light of a coffee shop at midnight in Seattle, rain on the windows, the smell of burnt espresso and dish soap. She put the phone down on the table. "It's done," she said. "For now," Dante said. "For now," she agreed. She looked at her coffee cup, at her own hands around it, the knuckles that had gripped the wheel valve in the sub-basement, the palms that had found the damper housing in the dark by count of steps. Her hands that had designed those spaces and then navigated them under conditions their designer had never anticipated having to face. She thought they looked different. She knew they didn't. The change was in her, not in her hands, and it was real without being visible, and that was how most real changes worked. "There's going to be a long period after this," she said. "Federal proceedings, depositions, the professional documentation tied up as evidence, my name and filings. She looked at him. None of that is going to be simple. No, he said. It won't. And you're restructuring, the things you're winding down. She paused. That's going to be complicated too. Also, yes, he said. So this, she gestured between them, at the table and the coffee, and the two people sitting across from each other in a coffee shop at midnight after two of the most compressed days she'd ever lived. This particular version of things, this ends tonight. He looked at her steadily. What version would you like to come after it? She thought about that. She thought about what she wanted, which was something she'd been systematically discouraged from doing for 3 years, and which she was now doing with the deliberate practice of a muscle being reused after disuse. I want my studio, she said. I want to do the work. I want to design spaces that are actually for the people who live in them, not for concealment or leverage or whatever other purpose they were being used for without my knowledge. She paused. I want to see my sister. I want to sleep more than 3 hours consecutively. She paused again. I want to look at that space in the Rainier Valley and decide for myself whether it's right for what I'm building. All of that is possible, he said. I know, she said. That's not nothing, knowing that something is possible. She looked at him. A week ago, I wasn't sure any of it was. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. She noticed it in the change of sound, the absence of the constant soft percussion against the window glass. The street outside was wet and reflective and empty. I'm sorry, he said, for the way I handled the first morning, the disclosure I should have made earlier. She looked at him. It was a direct apology, unqualified, without the architecture of justification around it. She received it the same way. I know why you did it, she said. That doesn't mean it was right. But I know why. She paused. We were both navigating with incomplete information and limited trust in a situation that didn't allow for the luxury of either. We managed, he said. We managed, she agreed. The barista called a closing time alert, 30 minutes. The other customer closed his laptop and began collecting his things without any sense of urgency. Ordinary things proceeding at their ordinary pace. Ivy picked up her coffee cup, drank what remained of it, which was cold and slightly bitter and real, set it down. I'm going to call the hotel, she said, the one you arranged. It's ready, he said, whenever you want. She stood up, put on her jacket, the one that wasn't hers, that Reyes had left for her in a safe house that felt like weeks ago rather than hours. She would get her own jacket soon. She would get her own everything, slowly, in the way that people rebuild the material inventory of a life after it's been stripped. She picked up her phone, looked at it for a moment, the cracked corner she'd had for 2 months and hadn't fixed because Marcus had managed the household accounts, and replacing the screen had required a conversation she hadn't wanted to have. She'd get that fixed too. Dante stood up across the table from her. He was looking at her with the expression she'd been cataloging since 7 in the morning, and she had a name for it now. Not quite the name she'd been reaching for across 2 days, but close enough. It was the expression of someone who had spent a long time operating in a world made entirely of exchange value and had encountered unexpectedly something that didn't fit that framework and had no idea yet what to do about that. Thank you, she said, for answering. He didn't say you called the wrong number because it was too easy and he didn't do easy. He didn't say you're welcome because it wasn't sufficient and he didn't do insufficient. He said, show me what you do with the Rainier Valley space when you've had time. I will, she said. She walked out of the coffee shop into the street that smelled like rain-washed concrete and the particular clean that Seattle always had after a serious storm, when the water had moved through and taken things with it and left the air simpler than it was before. She stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the sky. The clouds had broken in one section, not widely, just a gap, the kind that appears without announcement and closes again quickly and means nothing in terms of the weather that follows, but is there, briefly, if you happen to be looking. She looked at it for 3 seconds. Then she called the hotel and walked toward it through streets that were entirely ordinary and entirely hers, and the city carried on around her, and behind her the coffee shop light went off, and somewhere across the water in a federal processing facility, a man who had spent 3 years making himself the architecture of her life was being documented and contained and reduced to a case number. And ahead of her were all the rooms she hadn't designed yet, and she walked toward them. She walked toward them without looking back.